Rebel with a Cause, Mark Twain's Hidden Memoirs. Chapter 77, Loss of Jean and Rogers to the Undiscovered Country, and Clara to the Old World, 1909. Editor's Notes. Twain wrote The Death of Jean almost immediately following his daughter's death. He always processed his intense feelings by putting them down on paper. He told his lone surviving daughter, Clara, about this in a cablegram, informing her of Jean's death and urging her not to return home for the funeral. She lies there, and I sit here, writing, busying myself to keep my heart from breaking. How dazzlingly the sunshine is flooding the hills around. It is like a mockery. I saw her mother buried. I said I would never endure that horror again, that I would never again look into the grave of anyone dear to me. I have kept to that. They will take Jean from this house tomorrow and bear her to Elmira, New York, where lie those of us that have been released, but I shall not follow. I was getting acquainted with Jean in these last 9 months. She had been long in exile from home when she came to us 3/4 of a year ago. She had been shut up in sanitariums many miles from us. How eloquently glad and grateful she was to cross her father's threshold again. In a letter a few days later, Twain wrote Clara the following. Oh, Clara, Clara dear, I am so glad she is out of it and safe. Safe! I am not melancholy. I shall never be melancholy again, I think. You see, I was in such distress when I came to realize that you were gone far away, and no one stood between her and danger but me, and I could die at any moment. And then? Oh, then what would become of her? Well, she was willful, you know, and would not have been governable. You can't imagine what a darling she was that last 2 or 3 days, and how fine and good and sweet and noble and joyful, thank heaven, and how intellectually brilliant. I had never been acquainted with Jean before. I recognized that. But I mustn't try to write about her. I can't. I have already poured out my heart with the pen, recording that last day or 2. I will send you that, and you must let no one but Ossip read it. Goodbye. I love you so, and Ossip. Father. Twain told his biographer, Albert Bigelow Paine, that the death of Jean would be the last chapter of his autobiography. Whether Twain already knew he was going to write these turning points and wanted to throw Paine off track and trace of the trail, we will probably never know. It is quite possible that Twain simply changed his mind about what would mark the end of his autobiography. On the night before her death, Jean and her father chatted in the library until 9, later than they normally stayed up. At Twain's door, Jean said, I can't kiss you good night, Father. I have a cold, and you could catch it. He kissed her forehead, and then she kissed his hand. They parted with the mutual and usual, sleep well, dear. When Paine published Twain's essay on his youngest daughter's death in 1911, the year after Twain himself died, Paine prefaced it with the following comments. The death of Jean Clemens occurred early in the morning of December 24th, 1909. Mr. Clemens was in great stress of mind when I first saw him, but a few hours later I found him writing steadily. "I am setting it down," he said. "Everything. It is a relief to me to write it. It furnishes me an excuse for thinking." At intervals during that day and the next I looked in and usually found him writing. Then on the evening of the 26th, when he knew that Jean had been laid to rest in Elmira, he came to my room with the manuscript in his hand. "I have finished it," he said. "Read it. I can form no opinion of it myself. If you think it worthy, some day, at the proper time, it can end my autobiography. It is the final chapter." 4 months later, almost to the day, April 21st, he was with Jean. Another very brief portion of the essay is extracted below. "I lost Susie 13 years ago. I lost her mother, her incomparable mother, 5.5 years ago. Clara has gone away to live in Europe, and now I have lost Jean. How poor I am, who was once so rich. 74 years old, 24 days ago. 74 years old yesterday. Who can estimate my age today?" In her book, Mark Twain and Me, Dorothy Quick noted a change in her friend after the death of Jean. "He looked his age for the first time. In fact, he seemed suddenly to have grown years older and very worn. The once erect figure was a little stooped. He no longer threw back his chest, but the old flame was in his eyes when they met mine." In My Father, Mark Twain, Clara wrote about the death of Rogers. In 1909, Father lost his wonderful friend, Henry H. Rogers. I was spending a few days in New York and saw the report of his death in the morning paper. Knowing that Father was coming to town that day, I hoped I could gently break the news to him myself, and was indeed relieved to find, when I met him at the station, that he had not yet seen the newspaper. But there is no way to break sad news so that it does not carry a brutal shock with it. The expression of grief on Father's face was pitiful to behold. I got him to the hotel and made him lie down, for he looked so delicate, enveloped in this shadow of sorrow. He could think of nothing else for many days. Shortly before Rogers' death, Twain gave a speech in which he at first roasted his friend, but then turned serious, first mentioning Rogers' help to Helen Keller, then to himself and his family. "Without the public knowing about it, he rescued, if I may use that term, that marvelous girl. I would take the opportunity to tell something that I have never been allowed to tell by Mr. Rogers, either by my mouth or in print, and if I don't look at him, I can tell it now. In 1893, when the publishing company of Charles L. Webster, of which I was financial agent, failed, it left me heavily in debt. He saved my copyrights, and saved me from financial ruin. He it was who arranged with my creditors to allow me to roam the face of the earth for 4 years and persecute the nations thereof with lectures, promising that at the end of 4 years I would pay dollar for dollar. That arrangement was made. Otherwise, I would now be living out of doors under an umbrella, and a borrowed one at that." In his autobiography, Twain wrote this about the financial quagmire that Rogers was able to lead the Clemens family out of by means of his deft maneuverings. "We were strangers when we met and friends when we parted, half an hour afterward. The meeting was accidental and unforeseen, but it had memorable and fortunate consequences for me. He dragged me out of that difficulty and also out of the next one, a year or two later, which was still more formidable than its predecessor. He did these saving things at no cost to my self-love, no hurt to my pride. Indeed, he did them with so delicate an art that I almost seemed to have done them myself. By no sign, no hint, no word, did he ever betray any consciousness that I was under obligations to him. I have never been so great as that, and I have not known another who was. I have never approached it. It belongs among the loftiest of human attributes. This is a world where you get nothing for nothing, where you pay value for everything you get and 50% over. And when it is gratitude you owe, you have to pay 1,000. In fact, gratitude is a debt which usually goes on accumulating like blackmail. The more you pay, the more is exacted. In time, you are made to realize that the kindness done you has become a curse, and you wish it had not happened. Mr. Rogers was a great man. No one denies him that praise. He was great in more ways than one, ways in which other men are great, ways in which he had not a monopoly. But in that fine trait which I have mentioned, he was uniquely great. He held that high place almost alone, almost without a share. If nobilities of character were accorded decorations symbolizing degrees of merit and distinction, I think this one could claim rank unchallenged with the Garter and the Golden Fleece.